Morgan stood in the kitchen dish towel in hand, frozen, as she watched Caleb zip up the duffel bag. Her 34-year-old heart pounded so loudly, she barely heard his words. "I'm leaving," he muttered, without looking at her. His voice was low mechanical, like he had rehearsed it 100 times. Morgan said nothing at first. She simply stared, noticing the twitch in his jaw, the tremble in his hands. After over a decade of marriage, she knew every inch of him. She could tell he was scared, but not scared of hurting her. Scared of facing the consequences. Who, she finally asked, her voice catching. Caleb paused, then said the name like a curse. Lana. Morgan's breath left her body like someone had punched her in the stomach. Lana, the intern, the one Morgan always felt, looked at Caleb a little too long, laughed a little too brightly at his jokes. She had known. Deep down, she had known. But she had begged herself to trust him to silence the gut instinct clawing at her. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered. To Leo, Caleb shrugged. "I'll help," he said weakly. "Send money." Morgan laughed bitterly. She knew how this played out, young woman, midlife crisis man, chasing something that would never last. "Just go," she said, not even looking at him now. "Get out." Caleb hesitated, probably expecting more begging, more crying, more of the woman he had taken for granted. But Morgan didn't flinch, didn't ask him to stay. She stood tall, even as her insides shattered. As the door closed behind him, she exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. The house echoed with silence. No more lies, no more pretending. Just Morgan and the pieces she would have to pick up. And one room away, Leo sat doing homework, still innocent, still unaware his family had just crumbled. Her tears came fast and hot, but she wiped them away. There would be time to break down, but first she had to figure out how to tell her son that his father had chosen someone else, and that they were now on their own. The hardest part was not when Caleb left. It was what came after. The silence. The sharp, biting cold of a bed that suddenly felt too big. Morgan woke every morning to a house filled with shadows, ghosts of the life they once had. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter like judgment. Mortgage, utilities, Leo's school fees. She stared at them with a dull ache in her chest, wondering how on earth she'd carry this weight alone. Caleb had promised he would send money. That promise, like so many before, dissolved the moment he walked out. He stopped answering calls, stopped replying to emails. Lana had become his world, and Morgan and Leo were mere echoes of the past. At first, Morgan worked extra shifts at the hospital night duty, double shifts holidays. Her body ached, her spirit fractured. Still, she showed up because Leo needed her to. But even more painful than the work was watching her son fade. The boy who once ran to the door when she came home now barely looked up. His laughter was rare. His hugs became short-stiff. One day, she caught him staring blankly at the wall, his homework untouched eyes red. "Are you okay?" she asked. Leo didn't answer. That silence hit her harder than Caleb's betrayal. One evening, as she dozed on the couch between shifts, she found a note on the table. "Mom, I love you. I'll try to be strong too." Her heart broke all over again. He was just a child, yet he carried himself like a man shielding his mother, when it should have been the other way around. If you believe no child should carry that kind of pain, comment yes, and subscribe for more stories like this. The only light in her days came from Margaret, their elderly neighbor. Each evening, Margaret brought tea and quiet company. "Darkness doesn't last forever," Morgan, she'd say, pressing warm cups into her hands. "You've already survived the worst part, being left behind." Morgan clung to those words, using them like armor. She needed strength, not just for herself, but for Leo, because she could not let her son grow up thinking abandonment was normal, or that love came with conditions. She would fight for their future alone if she had to. Morgan was barely holding it together when Leo uttered a sentence that sent chills down her spine. "Zombam, I got revenge on Dad." The words came out casually, almost like he was confessing to breaking a window or sneaking cookies before dinner. But the look in his eyes, a strange blend of guilt and pride, told her this was something far more serious. She turned off the stove and faced him, heart thundering in her chest. "What did you do, Leo?" Her voice was calm, but the storm brewing inside her was anything but. Leo hesitated, then admitted he had accessed Caleb's computer and sent some documents to people at his office. I thought maybe it would scare him, make him realize what he did to us, he said, his voice cracking. Morgan sat down the room, spinning around her. This was her sweet, quiet son, now thrust into a role he was never meant to play. Just a few days ago, she was worrying about getting him a new backpack for school, and now she was wondering if he had ruined his father's career. Leo, you cannot do things like that. Revenge is not justice. It does not fix anything, she said, holding his hand. But she could not bring herself to yell. He had done this because he loved her, because he watched her cry silently, night after night, thinking he was asleep. Because Caleb, in chasing his fantasy with Lana, had not only abandoned his wife, he had broken something in his son, too. She asked him what exactly he sent. Spreadsheets, charts? Stuff I didn't really understand. I sent them to a bunch of emails. One of them said, "Boss," he whispered. Morgan's heart sank. Whatever damage was done, it was already out in the world, like a bullet that could not be recalled. She knew she had to act quickly, but delicately. "Leo," she said, brushing his hair back, "you were trying to protect me. But we cannot fight pain with more pain. We will face this together, okay?" He nodded, biting his lip. In that moment, Morgan understood something profound. Her son's innocence had been fractured, not by life, but by the choices of the man who should have protected it. And now, she had to be twice as strong, not just to rebuild their lives, but to help Leo believe that love, real love, would never leave them behind. Morgan could not sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed Leo's confession. The image of her son, head bowed, whispering that he had sent confidential documents to Caleb's office, haunted her. She tossed and turned in bed, weighed down by anxiety and guilt. Caleb's betrayal had shattered their home, but now the fallout threatened to scar her son forever. At sunrise, with dark circles under her eyes, she resolved to understand the full extent of Leo's actions. Over breakfast, she sat beside him, speaking gently. "Leo, I need to know exactly what you sent and to whom." His small shoulders slumped. "I found some files, charts, graphs, and numbers. I didn't understand them, but I knew Dad cared about them. I sent them to everyone in his email contacts." Morgan inhaled sharply. This was worse than she feared. Not only could it cost Caleb his job, but it could result in serious legal consequences. She tried not to panic. "Sweetheart, that could ruin your dad's entire career." Leo's eyes filled with tears. "I did it for you," he whispered. Morgan wrapped him in her arms, torn between heartbreak and fury. This little boy, her quiet warrior, had watched her cry herself to sleep and felt helpless. This was his way of fighting back. "I know you wanted to protect me," she said, stroking his hair. "But some things are too big for kids to fix. Revenge isn't a solution. It's a wound that never heals." She knew she had to shield Leo now, more than ever, from shame, from guilt, from carrying the weight of an adult's mistake. Later that day, Margaret stopped by with a thermos of herbal tea and freshly baked bread. Morgan broke down as she shared everything. Margaret, with her calm presence, said, "You cannot fix everything, Morgan. Your son acted out of love. He's not a villain. He's a child trying to save his world." Margaret's words gave Morgan the strength to stop blaming herself. She could not change the past, but she could guide Leo toward understanding. Caleb's choices had led them here, but hers would lead them forward. If you believe no child should have to carry the burden of adult betrayal, comment yes, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories. Morgan stood frozen in her kitchen as the phone slipped from her hand and landed on the counter with a dull thud. Caleb's voice still echoed in her ears, broken, desperate, barely recognizable. He had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his money, and most predictably, Sarah. "She left me," he had said, his voice trembling. "She said she does not want a man with nothing left to offer." Morgan stared at the wall, not surprised in the least. She had always suspected Sarah was in love with Caleb's status, not his soul. But hearing his downfall did not bring the satisfaction she thought it might. Instead, it stirred something darker, heavier exhaustion. That evening, Caleb showed up at the doorstep, disheveled and unshaven, his eyes hollow and desperate. "Morgan," he pleaded, "I need your help. I know I messed up. But please, I don't know what to do." Morgan looked at him, this shell of a man she once called her husband. She saw the panic in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped under the weight of his choices. Once she might have been the woman to help carry that weight. But not now. Not after the betrayal, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, worrying about Leo. "No," she said simply. "You made your choice. Now live with it." Caleb stared at her, stunned. He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "You do not get to break me and then ask me to help you gather your pieces. You lost us the moment you walked out that door." Her words landed like stone, but she did not flinch. Leo watched from the hallway, clutching the banister with wide eyes. For a moment, Morgan's heart trembled. But then she looked at her son, remembering all the nights he had cried himself to sleep, the mornings she had fought back tears to make his breakfast, the endless hustle to keep them afloat. Morgan knew this wasn't about vengeance. This was about boundaries. About protecting herself and Leo. She had nothing left to give Caleb, and she owed him nothing. As he stumbled away from the house, Morgan closed the door slowly and locked it. Not out of fear, but finality. A chapter had ended, not with screaming, not with forgiveness, but with quiet, deliberate resolve. And Morgan. She was finally free to turn the page. That night, after closing the door on Caleb for the last time, Morgan stood in the quiet of her living room, the silence wrapping around her like a blanket, both comforting and cold. Her body ached from exhaustion, but her mind spun with possibilities. She had survived the storm. Now she had to rebuild. With bills piling up and Leo's needs growing, Morgan began picking up extra shifts at the clinic, then taking on private home visits, wound care injections, wellness checks. The work was grueling, but with each job, she earned a little more than just money. She reclaimed purpose. Margaret, her kind-hearted neighbor, stepped in without asking. She watched Leo when Morgan was away, cooked meals, and sometimes just sat with her in quiet companionship. "You're not alone," Margaret often said. "You've got hands that heal and a heart that fights." Encouraged, Morgan dared to dream bigger. The idea of opening a small medical office took root, nothing fancy, just a clean, welcoming space where people in the community could get trusted care. But how she whispered to herself, staring at her sparse savings. "Start with what you do have," Margaret told her one afternoon. "You have experience. You have people who believe in you. That's enough to begin." Morgan took the leap. She rented a tiny unit with peeling walls and rusted pipes. But with every spare hour, she scrubbed, painted, patched, and transformed it. Her colleagues donated equipment. Margaret brought over curtains and plants. Leo painted signs in bold crayon letters, "Mom's Clinic." On opening day, Morgan stood outside her humble space, heart pounding. The first patient, an elderly woman with arthritis, left smiling, promising to tell her neighbors. Word spread. Patients came not just for medicine, but for kindness. Morgan became known not just as a nurse, but as a healer of hearts. She worked long hours, but the tiredness felt different now, earned, not drained. She began saving again, this time for Leo's summer camp, not for overdue bills. If you believe in second chances, drop a yes in the comments and subscribe for more stories that remind us how strength is born from pain. Morgan had turned ruins into refuge, not just for herself, but for a community that needed her light. And she was only just beginning. Morgan's journey did not end with the opening of her modest clinic. It was only the beginning. Word of her skill and warmth spread quickly. Neighbors, elderly patients, single mothers, even children with scraped knees and fevers began lining up outside her small door. She never turned anyone away. Her hands healed more than wounds. They restored hope. As the weeks passed, her schedule filled and her confidence grew. Each grateful smile, each thank you, each new referral was proof that she was building something real, not just a business, but a sanctuary born from ashes. With time, Morgan was able to send Leo to summer camp, a dream she had once shelved indefinitely. Seeing his laughter in the camp photos brought tears to her eyes. She had feared he would grow up surrounded by pain, but now he was thriving. Their bond, once strained by grief and uncertainty, had grown stronger than ever. Leo often told her, "You're my superhero, Mom," and in her heart, she finally believed it. One evening, while walking home, hand in hand, they spotted Caleb sitting alone on a park bench, shoulders hunched, face hollow. He looked up, eyes meeting Morgan's, silently pleading. But she gave him nothing, just turned to Leo with a smile and walked on. She owed Caleb no more pieces of her peace. Morgan no longer lived in the shadow of betrayal. She lived in purpose, joy, and fierce independence. Her clinic was expanding. She dreamed of hiring another nurse, perhaps even mentoring young women in the neighborhood who had once felt as hopeless as she had. Every pain she endured had taught her to rise stronger, wiser, more unstoppable. This story is for every woman who thought she could not survive without him, but did. If Morgan's strength inspired you, comment, "I'm stronger now," and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. So,